Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express, and as always, I hope you enjoy the journey. On the 15th of August, in a remote corner of Alaska, US President Donald Trump is set to meet Vladimir Putin. The supposed goal: negotiate an end to Russia's war against Ukraine. For months, Kyiv and European leaders had been working to get Trump to put direct pressure on Moscow, the kind of pressure that might force a ceasefire. And for a while, it seems to be working. Then came last weekend, when Trump appeared to reverse course. Instead of pressing Putin, he floated something else entirely, namely land swapping, a peace deal that trades cities like they are baseball cards. And that, to be fair, isn't a peace deal at all. It's surrender dressed up for the cameras. And in Ukraine, surrender isn't on the table. Without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
We appreciate it.
It is not just trenches that are shifting in Donetsk. It's the balance before the next big handshake. Days before Donald Trump sits down with Vladimir Putin in Alaska, Russian troops have pushed 10 kilometers into Ukraine's defense near Dobropilya. The goal? More than territory, it is leverage. The advance, part of a wider push between Pokrovsk and Konstantinivka, is designed to turn small battlefield gains into political weight ahead of the Alaska meeting. Even minor breaches, if timed right, can shift the mood before the talks. On the ground, Ukrainian brigades are straining. Russian assault groups, mostly light infantry without heavy armor, have slipped through thinly held lines, seizing Kucherov Yar, Zoloty Kolodias and Vesele.
I told the US President Donald Trump and all our European colleagues that Putin is bluffing. He is trying to put pressure before the meeting in Alaska along all parts of the Ukrainian front. Russia is trying to show that it can occupy all of Ukraine. Of course, this is their desire.
Military reports warn the next few days could decide whether these tactical advances become deeper penetrations in Ukrainian-held Donetsk. If Russia holds its new positions, Pokrovsk could be next in line. Critics inside Ukraine's ranks point to familiar problems: a shortage of manpower, fragmented units, and commanders sticking to outdated strategies. Without decisive action, Russia could escalate from talking platoon positions to swallowing entire battalions, as it did in 2022. For the Kremlin, the timing is no accident. A fresh salient in Donetsk could be wielded in Alaska as a bargaining chip. Proof that Russia still dictates the tempo on the ground. For Ukraine, the mission is clear: hold the line long enough to blunt both the military and diplomatic assault.
And now let's zone in on the East-splaining portion of our show. It's a peace deal idea that keeps coming back and keeps being rejected. Swapping land between Ukraine and Russia may sound like compromise to some, but for Kyiv, it's illegal, politically toxic, and strategically dangerous. Here is why.
Russia currently occupies about 20% of Ukrainian territory, from Crimea in the south to parts of Sumy in the northeast. Some of its land, like Donetsk and Luhansk, is central to Ukraine's industrial base and military defenses. Giving it up would weaken Ukraine's security and hand Russia a new springboard for future invasions. At the center of land swap talks are 5 main regions: Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, Zaporizhia and Crimea. Russia may offer up less strategic zones in Kharkiv or Sumy in exchange for full control over Donbass and the Zaporizhia nuclear plant. But giving up Donetsk would mean surrendering Ukraine's fortress belt, its key defensive line since 2014. President Zelensky has ruled it out. Under Ukraine's constitution, changing national borders requires a referendum. No president, cabinet or parliament can approve it, even during wartime. The idea resurfaced after Donald Trump called land trades good for both sides. But for Ukrainians, it would feel like surrender. After more than 3 years of war and tens of thousands of lives lost, public backlash would be swift and political fallout inevitable. Analysts say a frozen frontline may be more acceptable. It's not a win, but it avoids collapse. Kyiv would need strong Western security guarantees and time to rebuild, while never formally recognizing the occupied zones as Russian.
And now it's time to explore the issue in greater detail. Since January, Russia's demands have included surrendering all Ukrainian-controlled areas in the 4 regions it illegally claimed in 2022, namely Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporizhia. Those demands were always non-starters for Kyiv, but now reports suggested the Kremlin might be focusing just on the Donetsk Oblast. Even just Donetsk is no small concession. We're talking about major cities here, key industrial hubs and a population of over 250,000 civilians still under Ukrainian control. President Volodymyr Zelensky's response was swift and blunt. Ukraine's constitution explicitly forbids giving away territory. Ukrainians will not gift their land to the occupier, he said. Now, that statement alone was enough to irritate Trump, who publicly complained about Zelensky citing constitutional approval. He's had approval to go into war and kill everybody, but he needs approval to do a land swap, Trump quipped, blurring the lines over who started the war in the first place. Meanwhile, European leaders, many of whom had invested political capital into getting Trump to support a 30-day unconditional ceasefire, quickly closed ranks behind Ukraine. They reaffirmed that no deal should happen without Kyiv's participation. Others aren't even willing to dignify the land swap talk with serious attention. Oleksiy Ladyka, a journalist turned soldier with Ukraine's 92nd Assault Brigade, said his unit doesn't seriously consider the idea that our fate can be decided without us. And they are right not to. Russia's track record in occupied territories is clear: authoritarian control, torture, deportations, and militarization. You don't hand that over and call it peace. About 6,500 square kilometers of Donetsk Oblast remain in Ukrainian hands. Taking that territory by force could take years. That's why Moscow prefers a pen over a tank in this case. It's cheaper, cleaner, and comes with the bonus of making the West believe it's made progress towards peace. But as local officials and soldiers remind us, any territory handed over today just becomes the launch pad for tomorrow's offensive. For Ukraine, the rejection of Trump's land swap idea is both legal and moral. Legally, the constitution doesn't allow it. Morally, it would betray not just the soldiers fighting for every meter of ground, but the civilians living there. It would also reward the very behavior the West claims to oppose. If invading your neighbor and holding out long enough gets you a slice of their land, it's only a matter of time before others try the same. The Alaska summit will happen, and the photos will be taken. But if peace means trading away people's homes without their consent, then peace isn't really what's on offer here. For Ukrainians in Donetsk and beyond, the message is simple: no swaps, no surrenders, not now and not ever. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Royben F. Johnson, military expert at Breaking Defense. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So the talks are due to take place in Alaska. Do you think this in itself is somehow emblematic, given that Alaska has actually changed hands as a result of what was effectively a business transaction?
I don't read anything into that, although I'm quite certain that, Vladimir Putin is infamous for coming up with some pretzel logic twisted version of history. I'm sure he'll make a comment at some point that they deserve to have Alaska back. But no, I think that the greater significance is how it's going to take place at this incredibly large American air base, which exists primarily to defend North America against a Russian nuclear attack.
So this in itself is unusual, right? But we need to address the elephant in the room, namely the very concept of exchanging territories. Now, if you have an exchange, and this is what is rumored to be on the table, well, one side needs to give something in order to get something else. Now, at this stage, it would seem that while Russia is illegally holding Ukrainian territories, Ukraine isn't holding any territories it could give in exchange for that. So what would exchange mean in this context?
That's a very good question. And we've heard a lot of sort of confusing statements being made. The U.S. ambassador to NATO made a statement the other day that he said that no territory would be given away that had not been earned on the battlefield, and that really concerned a lot of people. It sounded like he was saying if the Russians have taken some territory and enough people have died, then they deserve to be able to keep it. But this is an illegal, unprovoked, completely barbaric invasion. And Zelensky has said he won't give up any territory, and the Europeans have said that Ukraine should not be forced to give up any territory. And there are some very, very unfortunate historical parallels that come to mind when we talk about two large countries trying to carve up a smaller one.
Well, whatever really is agreed, the idea of Russia keeping any of those territories, including Crimea, may be part of the Donbass, apart from the implications in international law, this is also unacceptable because of the way people are likely to be treated there. Can you actually tell us more about what threats and what risks is the Ukrainian population in these territories facing? Because they've already experienced many examples of abuse and mistreatment while under Russian occupation, right?
Well, I've said this before, I will say it again. Any agreement that could ever be made that would make any of these territories, that would have these territories come under permanent Russian occupation, this could create one of the most dramatic crises in terms of human migration that we've ever seen. People were going to leave because they all know what happens in the areas where the Russians are occupiers. The men get castrated, the women get raped and killed, and their bodies burned to try to cover up the crime, and the children get kidnapped and taken away. And no one's going to sign up for that. So we've already had several million Ukrainians have left the country, many of who are never coming back. So it'll be more of the same. So that's not a desirable outcome. So that's one reason why you can't force a territorial concession on the Ukrainians, because no one wants the aftermath like that to transpire. But secondly, you can't just say, okay, we're going to freeze the battle lines and where they are now, and that's where, okay, the battle lines where everyone is currently holding territory at this moment, those are not necessarily defensible positions in the long term. They're not necessarily geographically suitable. So, I should also add the fact that no matter what happens, the Russians will continue air and drone attacks, no matter what. So the populations really are never safe, not even in places in Western Ukraine, which are far from the front lines.
So if Ukraine is not going to agree to any formal annexation of these territories, are we risking a situation whereby these concessions will be disguised in some, using some different legal language, perhaps? So this is going to be an area with contested status. Are we going to have to wait for the next couple of decades that diplomatic means will be deployed for the purposes of determining the future status and so on? But in reality, if there is, as you said, actual Russian control, this is not really going to change anything, not for the people who live there. I mean, not for the better,
no, it
for
won't.
The worse, definitely.
If the Russians occupy, it'll definitely be for the worse. There are two different. There are two different issues. One is if the Russians physically control some territory and they have their forces sitting on it, and they refuse to leave. That, however, does not mean that the rest of the world has to recognize officially, de facto, or de jure rather, they do not have to recognize Russian ownership of that territory. We don't recognize Russian ownership of Crimea because they illegally invaded and occupied that territory in 2014. So as long as the as the civilized world, as we call it, doesn't recognize any territory occupied by the Russians, yes, these things will be contested, and it could be this way for a long time. I think it could probably stay this way until there's some collapse of the Russian state as we know it, which is a possibility.
Well, before that happens, there is also the question of legality. Why do you think so many experts and politicians are willing to try and, push for a solution whereby Ukraine gives away territory, even though this is illegal under the Ukrainian constitution? Do they not accept the doctrine of sovereignty of nations anymore? Do they think that the international community or specific countries can simply impose their will upon the sovereign country that is Ukraine and say, yeah, you need to break your constitution and just give away your land if you want to have peace, or at least a modicum of one?
Well, there's several factors at work here. Politicians always want to be the people who are the heroes of the day. Oh, I made that peace deal happen. Oh, I made that. That's one factor. The other factor is people are worried that the longer this conflict goes on, the closer we get to some sort of the possibility of full-scale war breaking out. I mean, one of the incidents that prompted Trump to say, okay, we're going to turn the delivery of weapons back on, it was when Foreign Minister Sikorsky called General Keith Kellogg, Trump's special envoy for Russia and Ukraine. He said, hey, he says, so, the Russians launched a huge attack on Kyiv last night, and they actually hit the Polish embassy. We're like one step away from an accidental, unintended Article 5 violation, Article 5 of the NATO Charter. So that's another reason. And the third reason is that, this is kind of traditional within Western European countries. They want things to be turned off, and they want to go back, and they want to not have to worry about the possibility of war, and they want to not have to raise taxes to pay for the military that they're going to need to sustain a conflict of this kind.
So now, you've mentioned that Russia might actually be more fragile as a regime than it seems. Why do you think many countries seem to be absolutely scared of the very idea of the Putin regime breaking up? Are they actually applying this, this sort of great banking entity logic to Russia, that it's too big to fail? Don't they recognize the fact that many of the issues, well, including the question of the war, might actually be at least partially solved by Putin's eventual collapse?
Oh, we've been here before. I mean, people are very... people in high positions are very, very nervous when a major nation state like Russia has the potential to fall apart, because they think, oh my gosh, as bad as it is, we could get something worse if the current state dissolves. I mean, everybody should remember that when the Soviet Union was faltering and foundering, and it was pretty obvious there wasn't much life left in it as a nation state, and then President George Bush 41, the senior Bush, was in Moscow, and then Air Force One made this special flight to Kyiv, in which he basically implored the Ukrainians, oh, no, don't seek independence, you'll break up the Union. People get very uncomfortable with that because, number one, fear of the unknown, and number two, it creates a lot of work for people that don't particularly like their situation to be that disturbed by oh my God, the Soviet Union's imploded. What do we do? Now we got 14 new countries. How do we deal with all of them? It's always better the devil you know.
Robin F. Johnson was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your expertise.
Thank you for having me.
And now we move on to Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you absolutely don't want to miss. Russia is flooding the 2025 local elections with soldiers turned candidates. More than 1,600 veterans of the war in Ukraine are now on the ballot.
The Central Election Commission confirms over 1,600 Russian soldiers have been nominated for September's regional and local elections, with nearly 1,400 already officially registered. Most are expected to run under the ruling United Russia Party, part of the Kremlin's broader strategy to turn battlefield loyalty into political capital. President Putin has branded war veterans Russia's new elite, backing a government training program called Time of Heroes, to prepare them for public office. This year alone, over 1,000 veterans will run in 67 regions, including 2 regional governor candidates. In 2026, the Kremlin reportedly aims to insert at least 100 veterans into Russia's lower house of parliament, reshaping Russia's legislative body with battle-tested loyalists.
Ukraine is quietly importing foreign workers to keep its economy afloat. With millions abroad and a workforce depleted by war, the country is turning to Asia.
Ukrainian businesses are increasingly hire workers from India, Bangladesh, Pakistan and Nepal to fill roles in construction, logistics and agriculture. Recruiters say demand is rising fast, as 3/4 of Ukrainian firms report severe labor shortages. Although numbers remain low, only in the thousands, experts warn that reconstruction will be impossible without a broader immigration strategy. A draft law to streamline hiring and permits is still stalled in Parliament. Foreign workers face risks ranging from language barriers to basic healthcare gaps. Despite security concerns from some countries like Bangladesh, Ukrainian firms are offering housing and competitive pay to attract labor. But without a national strategy, efforts remain fragmented and slow-moving.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.